Okay, so welcome everyone to our DevOps chat with Pawel Brodzinski. Um,
Hello.
Hi, Pawel. I first did a little bit of work with you a long time ago when I interviewed you about project management, and you gave me some really interesting answers, and I presented them at the APM conference. And then I don't think I saw you for quite a while, and I started getting interested in Kanban, and I started looking around for videos and information on Kanban, and the next thing you popped up giving presentations on Kanban. So it was really interesting, and I learned a lot from you during that stage. So we're going to talk about why it's important for teams to really care about the products they're developing, something we've called giving a damn.
Yeah.
But before we talk about that, I'd be really interested to sort of have a brief summary of your background and what your interests have been, and how your interests have changed, and how you've reached the position you're in now.
So this is kind of a story that I sometimes use when I describe what I was doing during my career. So I've been in pretty much any role that you can think of that is connected to software development, like think testing, software development, product management, project management, and both in kind of line positions and management positions. So I have pretty broad coverage of what I've been doing. Customer support. This is one of the most interesting things that I've been doing. And I ended up like going through the ranks in different organizations. I went up, as it typically happens. And then I reached the point when I actually exactly knew what the next job should be. I wanted to find a small organization where my influence over how the whole organization is designed, like the things like organizational culture, what the whole system is. I have a big influence over that because typically so this was basically my frustration in my previous job, that I could do only that much
Mm-hmm.
and couldn't go further than that. And just so happened that I've been talking to an old friend of mine who was looking for a replacement of his job as a CEO in his company, Lunar Logic, and this is how I ended up doing what I'm doing. And as with my all other roles, I thought that I would be doing different things that I'm doing. So
As often happens, yeah.
yeah. So right now, I guess the organizational change is the main theme of what I'm doing, but what it emerged to be is that we turned into what I call extreme self-organization company,
Mm-hmm.
which means that we have no managers, which means that my role as a CEO is somewhat artificial in a way, which is quite an interesting story, but probably not the one that we will focus on today. But there are lots and lots of things that relate to how we are doing those things at Lunar Logic that are relevant to the topic that we want to cover today. So there will be bits and pieces of that like popping up throughout this conversation, I
Yeah, yeah.
guess.
So tell us. I was going to say, tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. So you're the CEO for Lunar Logic. What does Lunar Logic do, and what kind of topics are you interested in? Or have you been interested recently and over the last couple of years?
So I always have problems to describe the company. So in a way, we are a web software development shop, Offshore one.
Hmm.
So we are located in Krakow, Poland. We are working with clients in Western Europe, US, uh, Middle East. Interestingly enough,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, but we don't tend to think about us as just software developers.
Hmm.
So we think of us more as product developers, I would say. So it's not that. So I tend to tell our potential clients that if you look for software developers, you should look elsewhere.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, because we don't. So in a setup where you just need software development power, we don't shine most. We
Hmm.
shine most when we are involved into into what the product end up being.
Mm-hmm,
So this is the more authority you give us, the more autonomy we have in a project, the more value we can provide to our clients. So this is what we do, and this is the part of what our transformation is right now. We want to turn more and more into being perceived more like product consultants than just, like software developers, software testers, graphic designers, UX experts, and these kind of things.
Yeah.
And my role in that is not that easy to define. So given that we gave up on the notion of having managers, it's more, I guess a guide would be a good comparison of what I'm doing. I try to guide us as the company, as an organization, through a process of evolving our organizational culture so that we are ready for the challenges that we set up for ourselves. It's also trying to guide us through the setting up what those challenges are, actually, because one interesting part of the story was that we didn't have a strategic goal as a company for more than a year and a half, because I refused to set one, to have one in a top-down manner, and we were waiting for something to emerge, and then I realized that it's not going to just emerge. That there needs to be some sort of, I don't want to say mentorship, but some sort of, I don't know, moderation. So this would like the words I'm mentioning, guide, moderator, mentor. These are probably the roles that I perceive myself in right now, mostly. And interestingly enough, from a perspective of decision making, like the thing that defines management or the whole hierarchy in the organization, there is very, very little difference in terms of decision-making power between me and our interns who joined the organization a month ago.
So it's a very flat structure then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And I suppose what would be quite interesting for me to hear from you as well is, I think, offshore and nearshore is something that's being used a lot now by, a range of different businesses and companies. I still think that often the perception is that this is about cheap resource, so it's getting developers at a cheaper day rate. So I'm interested to hear your view as someone who runs, I suppose, a nearshore company, and also relating to that, what do you think is important to make the use of offshore and nearshore a success?
So I'll probably start with a cultural match, because I don't. So despite the fact that we want to avoid the notion of being just offshore software developers, this is our role in some of the projects that we run for our clients. But we want to avoid that notion. But sometimes, there are companies that are looking just to, send some way, throw that work over the fence, and have that work delivered over the fence against some, I don't know, testing criteria, blah, blah, blah. And they're happy with that.
Yeah.
And if they're looking for that and they're happy with that, I don't say that they should be looking for something else. At the same time, when I look at how we learn to develop product over years, a huge rise of lean startup and all the thinking around, because it started with Eric Ries's book, but right now it's the whole movement, conferences, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's massive.
And we may discuss how much tangible value is in that, but the whole movement is massive. So we understand better how we may better invest money so that the way we approach product development is, statistically speaking, more successful. So we deliver value more frequently. Yeah. And we turn products into successful things more frequently. Yeah. So living in that world, my perception is that we need more and more teams. Yeah. That work with those principles in mind. And then when we are talking about nearshore, offshore developers, there are still very, very few organizations that would take care of that. They're like, oh, there is a project, so we agree on rates and send us work, and we'll develop, all those features that you send us.
Yeah.
While my perception is that, like, giving a damn, or the theme of our conversation is that to start questioning, like, why we should build that. And we want to understand why it does make sense. And oh, by the way, since we developed like probably around 200 projects so far, we have quite some experience in terms of what does make sense or and what doesn't make sense. Sometimes it happens that we develop similar projects and we face specific challenges. So I perceive that in this case, the value of software development partner is not necessarily in super efficient coding or super effective price, but more in terms of providing, and this is one of the themes that pop up over and over and over again, in looking good in terms against value for money perspective. So we want to provide good value for money you pay, and it doesn't really matter whether an hourly rate is high or low. What matters is how much value we can provide for the money you paid us. So when I'm talking about the kind of cultural match, there are more and more product companies looking for support in software development that appreciate companies that are not looking only, to do more work, because actually you send us more work, we bill you with bigger invoices, right? This is kind of the model that is still widely popular. Our perception is you tell us what you want to achieve, and we help you using all our knowledge or our experience to achieve your goals. And sometimes it means telling you, you know what, it doesn't, like, given the budget you have and given the goals you set in front of yourselves, we don't see any feasible way of achieving those goals using that money. So you better not start anything and spend that money, like sipping beer in a nice pub. So at least you have some fun at least. So this is what I think is important, like understanding the goals and understanding where the match between a client and a nearshore / offshore partner is, and where that match happens, and it's not always easy to figure that out whether the match is, but actually we invest lots and lots of effort during so-called sales process, which is like quote unquote sales process in our case. We do that in an unusual way, as most of the things. So much of effort we invest into sales process is into figuring out whether there is a match or not. And we are happy to say we are a wrong partner for you, even though we could start a project, technically speaking. So this is what I think is a key thing. It's
really interesting to hear that, because I suppose this relates to if you have a very traditional approach to software development where you think you can identify all the requirements up front and all the design, and now we just need someone to do the code, then it kind of makes sense that you send requirements to someone and you get code back. But I suppose as we're learning, I think across the software industry, that you don't know what all the requirements are, and you don't know what's going to produce most value, and so you do need to work in a more iterative way. And actually often it's the developer that's writing the code that sees something and goes, well, that doesn't make sense, that's never going to work. And I suppose it's a different mentality that says, rather than just, well, that's what they've asked for, that's what they've specified, I'll code it, I'll send it, we can bill. It's a different mentality to say, well, actually, no, there's a better way of doing this. We need to go back to the customer or go back to the user even and figure out what's really required that's going to bring some value. So I wonder whether for many the approach to offshore and nearshore is perhaps tied more to that traditional approach to development, and there perhaps needs to be a shift as we see more of a DevOps and more of a customer focused, more of an iterative way of working coming about. So I suppose coming then onto our topic, and you've started to describe what you mean by giving a damn. Can you sort of give a bit more detail or perhaps some examples about why you sort of believe that the developers really have to care deeply about the product they're working on in order for something to be successful?
So I think that train of thought starts in a research that's been done on engagement at work. It was like a global poll run by Gallup on state of global workforce. So the outcome is that 13% of employees worldwide are engaged at work.
Wow.
And the rest are either disengaged or actively disengaged. So they don't give a damn, or they are harming their environments, their colleagues, the system they work in, actively harming their workplace. So the situation that we look at is bad. So this is kind of where it all starts. Now, if people we keep the context of an offshore or nearshore partner, if my team is disengaged, the value they would provide, no matter what, would be mediocre at best. And then there will be all sorts of patterns that you would see. It's like, you know what, we actually don't think writing this feature makes sense, but if we build that feature, we will have more work and there will be an invoice, so we actually don't give a damn, so we will just do as you tell us, and that's all fine. Now, if you start thinking about how to turn the ship around, how to address the engagement problem, this is kind of a longer argument. My assessment of that is that the biggest problem is lack of authority, like inside of an organization. And this is, by the way, one of the common themes why we ended up having a Lunar Logic organized the way we have to distribute autonomy. Now, if you distribute autonomy, you suddenly start seeing behaviors like, oh, you send us a feature that doesn't make sense, and people want to have autonomy to discuss that feature, to question that feature. And they don't want to be, answers like, you know what, you're just software developers, do as you are told. They're not happy in that scenario. From one perspective, they become motivated and engaged at work, but then they want more. Like this happens because they have more autonomy. So the way they perceive their role changes, and the more autonomy they have, the further they want to get. And this is something that emerged, like on our evolution. This was something that was like kind of an emergent set of behaviors. That people wanted to get involved more and more into what we actually build, and then why we build that, and how we define that. So people were going like the way we were trying to address like the problem of engagement. It had a huge impact on how people perceive their role in the relationship with the client, not only inside of the company, but with relationship with clients. And now we suddenly have discussions like, oh, I do prefer to work on a product where I have actual impact of how that product is defined and how it evolves. And not only, I don't perceive my role as a software developer only, who is fine to switch projects every now and then because the new one has a newer and more trendy technology to work on. It's just I actually prefer to work on the old code base as long as I feel I have impact on a product. So this is this shift that you mentioned, the shift in perception of how those setups may work. But as I said before, it's like a client need to understand the setup. Because if they want to just have software developers, it would end up frustration on both ends. Because then you have this clash between one side expects that we would get a lot of autonomy, and the other side doesn't want to give that autonomy and doesn't feel like requests to get that autonomy is even justified.
And it sounds like from what you're saying, there's almost a virtuous cycle, which is you give people more autonomy, that increases their engagement, and the more engaged they are, the more they want to take more autonomy. And it kind of is that right? A kind of positive feedback loop. Wow. Yeah.
And the other one is true as well. I mean, you give people less autonomy, the more disengaged they are, the more following the process types they become.
Yep.
And the less autonomy they want, the less engagement they get.
And then the more process and controlled gets pushed onto them as a result. And so, yeah, you either have a virtuous cycle upwards or I guess a vicious cycle downwards. Yeah, that's really, really. And the other thing that it sort of relates to a little bit, I think. So we're seeing with DevOps, some people start to use terms like biz DevOps or cust DevOps to try and, DevOps, I think, started with we need more collaboration at the deployment, at the maintenance end. And what people are seeing is actually it's not just about more collaboration in that part of the life cycle, it's more collaboration at the other end, the requirements, the why are you building it, and that all ties in, I think, very much with what you're saying. So in terms of, and I suppose you've touched on this a little bit already, what do you think are the common barriers to working in that kind of way, so having to being more autonomous and caring more about the product? What barriers do you see in organizations that prevent that happening?
I guess there are two, and one is internal, one is external. So the easier one I think is the external one. So what I already mentioned, we are looking for a good match between the expectations of our clients and what we want to do, how we want to work in terms of autonomy, in terms of what's our role in product development. And that refers to actually sales process. So in pretty much all the organizations that I've been with before, the sales process, and I've seen in many cases, the sales process is pretty much, we want to sell as much as possible because this is how we generate profits. While what we are trying to do is we are trying to find the best match, because those relationships turn out into be the long-term relationships that yield a lot of money, and we don't mind having slack time here and there because it gives us options to look for kind of new good relationships. And which means that we are, on many occasions, we are not trying to optimize for financial results. And interestingly enough, since we adopted that approach, our financial results skyrocketed. Right. Basically. So this is one thing, and this is kind of a mental shift of thinking about building a client base, sales process, this kind of things, and then as I say, it's externally in a way that in a way, to some point, you can convince your client to adopt your way of doing things, especially if you have like very prestigious brands. Like it's an artificial example, but I guess no one would go out at Apple offices and tell them, you know what, the way you design products is wrong. As like they know how to design products. So there are companies in kind of consulting area where you can work with them only as long as you work with them the way they work, and that's it. You cannot change that. So this is one part. The other part is internal, and this goes and this is again kind of a long story, because to introduce more autonomy in an organization, we need a mind shift in management, and I'm talking about top management. So basically, starting from from the beginning of our education system, from primary school, we are taught to think that the only management structure that there is a hierarchical structure where the power is distributed in top-down manner. And while it addresses some of the challenges with decision-making, namely indecisiveness, accountability, it creates a huge gap in autonomy. and there is a huge fear in letting that go, and I can tell very well because I'm living through that fear still. Because, like, technically speaking, it goes like we distribute power from the top. So CEO formally has all the power that they want, and then they distribute parts of that power to the subordinates, and it goes all the way down through the hierarchy. So letting others to make decisions is in a way scary, because I let others make decisions for which I'm kept accountable. And this is the hard part. And obviously, we didn't make that change in one world move, because it wouldn't be wise. But then again, it is scary in a way. We were taught that it is pretty much the one management paradigm that we should follow, and like pretty much all the whole education system, pretty much almost all the organizations are run according to that paradigm.
Yeah.
So it is hard to think that there is something else. So these are the two biggest barriers to introduce autonomy. But then, what you actually mentioned when asking that question. But then, autonomy pays off hugely, because you don't only see people being involved, being accountable, and making reasonable calls, within the area which they were hired for, say like software developers, but they start thinking, our deployment process is screwed up. How about we talk to the client and we introduce them to what continuous integration is, and we set up that for them, and we convince them why it makes sense, and we guide them through the whole process, and then at the end of the day, it's not only us who are happy that we have like more convenient deployment process, but you also see a huge improvement in the effectiveness of the work on the client side. For like, we can have a team of 5 and the client can have a team of 200, and we see the impact on those 200 people. So,
yes.
So this is how it pays off on many accounts, and the same is true when in the example that I already mentioned. Like, we were discussing what should be built. So the other end of the other, like the Beast DevOps. Like I'm not I'm not fluent with the lingo, but the earlier part, the upstream part of the workflow, and then you're talking about what is reasonable to be built. Why should we be building that? Are there better ways to achieve those business goals besides of building a feature? Because sometimes you can, reorganize slightly work of a few people, and you don't need to add a feature to software.
Yeah, and I think it's a big thing that we're all learning, which is that DevOps, some people see it as a very technical, it's continuous integration, it's how you do your source control, but actually it's about how do you get teams who feel really accountable, but also autonomous, empowered for a product or a particular software service. And as you're sort of hinting there, that people don't think, well, I'm the developer, so I've written the code, and I'm the database admin, so I've set up the database tables, or I'm the release guy, so I do the releases, but rather that everyone is working together and really doing whatever they can to contribute to the whole, rather than just a particular niche or a particular area. So it's we're running out of time, Pawel, but before we finish, I did just want to ask you a final question, which is that, in terms of making an organization very, very flat and giving people a lot of autonomy, you said that that for management to let go in that way, it's a very scary thing to do, and you've experienced that yourself. So what would your kind of top tip be for how to start that, how to begin? How did you begin, and how would you suggest other people begin along that path?
So actually there are many different circles of spheres of influence that any manager has, and you can start giving up your power on small things. So I think we start. So there are obvious things like let a team decide, how they prioritize features in their backlog. I mean, like no manager really needs to tell people how to do it, like in a self-organized, in a healthy self-organized teams. So we are doing some of that already, some decisions, but the first kind of explicit exercise that we did was like spending money, and I'm talking about spending petty money. So the trick is to let people do that and accept the fact that they are going to make some decisions that you would eventually disagree with. And then this is kind of an exercise when a manager teaches themselves to let that go, to not intervene in any way. So for me, so this is kind of a story that I sometimes mention, is that the first time someone made a decision, like a decision that had financial consequences that I disagreed with, it was worth I think around 100 British pounds. So it's like really, when you think about like how much it costs to run 25 people big organization in IT, it's like nothing. I felt physically bad. Like literally, and it wasn't even. So I couldn't even justify it. It was a good thing to do, except I didn't see any value to Lunar Logic that we would get. Instead, it was about sponsoring an event. I felt physically bad, but this was like I started learning dealing with that on small things, and then we were gradually making those things bigger and bigger and bigger. We eventually turned. We are making. We are following the same pattern. The way we spent like petty money, we are following the same pattern to agree on raises for people. Right. And then again, there are decisions I disagree with, and it's all fine. And I learned to cope with that. So it will be like start with small steps.
So start with something small and build up from there would be your advice.
Yeah, and I don't because this is not experiment that it's safe to fail. In a way, you cannot retreat back. So once you give people autonomy, so there's a huge difference between authority and autonomy. I can give you a formal authority to decide which beer I'm going to drink next. I can give you formal authority over that decision. But if I make you afraid of making a decision that I wouldn't like, you will ask me like, well, what I would prefer. And you have authority but don't have autonomy. And the crucial bit is autonomy. So once you tell people, oh, you can make those decisions, but then you veto them or change them or double guess them,
then you haven't given, the autonomy isn't there then. Yeah.
And actually you are not back to the square one. You even took 2 steps back, because now people are burned. They know that, oh, it's been a trick.
So I suppose you're saying there that start small, but also small enough that you really can cope, even if it makes you feel physically bad. You can cope with not overruling or vetoing or overriding those decisions, because if you do, you're actually in a worse position than you started in. Wow. Yes. Okay. That's great advice, I think. So, thank you so much, Pawel, for joining us, and I'm really looking forward to the Twitter chat as well. Just really great to hear that kind of thought leadership and really very, I'd call it cutting edge thinking. I think you're doing things that very few other companies and people are doing, and then or would even dare to do, and then you're reporting on the results and kind of helping us all to learn. So thank you so much for joining us for the video, and look forward to chatting on Twitter as well.
Looking forward to that as well. Thank you for having me.